Hello everyone, I hope you are all having a wonderful day. Today we will explore a touching summer story about Trieu Khanh, Hanh, and Tieu. During the quiet holiday, Tieu tries to teach disabled Hanh how to write her own name, but they have to squeeze together at a broken old table with torn notebooks on the floor. Seeing this, Trieu Khanh decides to rebuild the table into a proper study place for both of them. But at the end of that peaceful moment, Duong suddenly appears outside the gate. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. The summer break made the small wooden house quieter than usual. There was no sound of Tieu rushing to school, no worn school bag on her shoulder, no footsteps along the muddy path beside the orange orchard. Afternoon sunlight stretched across the yard and touched the wooden walls. For other families, summer break meant rest. But inside Trieu Khan's house, the quiet days revealed what they still did not have. That afternoon, Trieu Khanh came back from the garden with dry branches on his shoulder. His white sleeveless shirt was damp with sweat, and his green camouflage pants were stained with soil. He planned to place the branches near the stove and prepare a simple meal for Hanh and Tieu. But before he reached the kitchen corner, he heard Tieu's soft voice inside. "Han, hold the pencil like this. Don't press too hard. Just follow the lines slowly." Trieu Khanh stopped at the doorway. Inside the room, Tieu and Han were squeezed together at the old table. The table had been repaired many times, but it was still too narrow and weak. One leg was tied with cloth so it would not shake too badly. The cracked surface barely held one torn notebook. Han sat on the inner side. She was a grown woman, not a child, but her body had been left disabled after a painful misfortune. Since Trieu Khanh had brought her home and taken care of her, she had tried to live quietly, never asking for more than a place to sleep, a bowl of rice, and peace. But today, Tieu had placed a torn notebook in front of her and was teaching her how to write. Tieu held the page with one hand and guided Han's trembling fingers with the other. Han's wrist was weak and every small movement took effort. When she tried to write her own name, the pencil scratched unevenly across the paper. The notebook slipped because there was not enough space. Half of the page hung over the edge. A few old worksheets lay near Han's bare feet. Han pulled her hand back, embarrassed. "It is ugly. I cannot write properly." Tieu shook her head. "No, Han. It is better than yesterday. You already remember the shape." Han gave a tired smile. "You are on summer break. You should be outside playing, not teaching someone like me." Tieu looked at her with clear eyes. "When you came here, you were hurt and could barely move, but you still worried about me. Now I want to help you write your name." Those words made Trieu Khan's heart tighten. Tieu was still young, but life had taught her kindness early. Han was disabled and weak, yet she still carried shame in her eyes. Then the pencil rolled off the cracked edge and fell to the floor. Trieu Khanh stepped inside before Tieu could bend down. "Let me pick it up," he said. Tieu looked up in surprise. Han lowered her eyes and placed her weak hand on her lap. Trieu Khanh picked up the pencil and set it beside the notebook. He did not scold them. He only looked at the cramped table, the torn pages, and the way Han sat carefully so she would not take up too much space. "Is this how you two have been practicing?" he asked. Tieu answered softly. "I wanted to teach Han during summer break. She wants to write her own name, but the table is too small." Trieu Khanh shook his head. Han should not have to struggle with a shaking table just to write one word. Han tried to stop him. "Trieu Khanh, don't worry. You already brought me here and cared for me. I cannot ask for more." Trieu Khanh looked at her and said, You did not ask. I saw it myself. The room became quiet. He stepped outside and placed the branches beside the stove. Beyond the rough wooden fence, he remembered a neighbor's storage shed where several old planks had been left after a broken chicken coop was taken apart. They were scratched, dusty, and full of nail holes. But to Trieu Khanh, they could become useful. He made up his mind. He would ask for those planks, remove the damaged nails, take apart the old table legs, and build a wider study table for both of them. Inside the house, Tieu gathered the torn pages from the floor. Han rested her weak hand on her lap, still looking at the crooked letters she had written. Neither of them knew Trieu Khanh had already decided. He was not simply going to repair a table. He was going to give Tieu a proper place to teach and give Han a place where she could learn without shame. Trieu Khanh walked to the neighbor's storage shed under the afternoon heat. The shed stood behind a bamboo fence, with broken chicken coop pieces stacked beside it. The planks were dusty, cracked, and full of nail holes, but they were wide enough for what he needed. The neighbor looked surprised when Trieu Khanh asked for them. "These boards are old," he said. "What will you do with them?" Trieu Khanh touched one plank and tested its strength. "I want to make a study table for Tieu and Han. They have been sharing a table too small for one person." The neighbor became quiet, then nodded. "Take what you can use. If it helps them, take it." Trieu Khanh thanked him and carried the boards home. To other people, they were waste. To him, they were a chance to give Han and Tieu something steady. When he returned to the yard, Tieu ran out first. Han slowly came to the doorway and held the wooden frame for support. Her disabled body was still weak, but she wanted to see what he had brought. "Why did you bring so much wood?" Tieu asked. Trieu Khanh laid the boards under the shade. "The old table is too small. I am going to make it wider." Han shook her head at once. "You already worked all day. Don't do more because of me." Trieu Khanh picked up the hammer and looked at her gently. "This is for our house. A house should have a place to eat, a place to sleep, and a place where people can learn." Tieu smiled when she heard that. Trieu Khanh began by pulling out the old nails. Tieu sat nearby, sorting the usable pieces from the broken ones. Han could not do heavy work, but she wiped dust from the smoother boards with an old cloth. Even that small movement tired her hand, yet her eyes looked brighter. Then Trieu Khanh carried the old table out into the yard. Its surface was cracked and one leg was loose. He turned it upside down, removed the weak parts, and saved the strongest legs. He cut extra supports from the old planks, placed two wide boards side by side, and joined them tightly underneath. The sound of hammering echoed through the quiet afternoon. Tieu watched closely as Trieu Khanh measured the height again and again. He wanted Han to sit comfortably without bending too much. He also wanted Tieu to have enough room when she guided Han's hand. After smoothing the sharp edges with a worn knife, Trieu Khanh stepped back. "Bring the notebooks." Tieu quickly returned with her school notebook and Han's torn practice book. She placed them on the new table. For the first time, both notebooks lay flat without slipping. There was still space left for pencils and the old oil lamp. Han stared at the table without speaking. Trieu Khanh noticed her silence. "What is wrong?" Han shook her head, but her eyes were wet. "No one has ever made a study table for me before?" Tieu moved closer and held her arm. "Then this is your first one." They carried the table into the house and placed it near the window, where the afternoon light came in clearly. The room was still simple, with old wooden walls, a bamboo bed, and a clay water jar in the corner. But the wider table made the space feel warmer, as if the house had gained a small classroom. Tieu opened the practice book again. Han rested her weak hand properly on the smooth board. Her fingers still trembled, but the paper no longer slid away. "Write slowly," Tieu said. "Just your name." Han pressed the pencil down and formed the first letter. It was crooked, but it was clear. Tieu smiled proudly, and Trieu Khanh stood by the doorway, watching in silence. To him, the scene was more meaningful than a harvest or a repaired roof. Tieu was teaching with patience. Han was learning with courage, and the old discarded wood had become something that gave them both pride. As the sun lowered behind the orange orchard, a shadow appeared outside the front gate. Duong stood there staring into the house. Her face was unreadable as she looked at Tieu sitting beside Han at the new study table. Trieu Khanh slowly turned his head and saw her. The peaceful room suddenly became tense. Duong did not call out. She only stood there looking at Tieu, looking at Han, and looking at the table Trieu Khanh had built for them. For a moment, no one moved, and Trieu Khanh understood that the quiet summer day was not over yet. During summer break, Tieu notices that Han, a disabled woman taken in and cared for by Trieu Khanh, quietly wants to learn how to write her own name. Inside the small wooden house, Tieu sits beside Han at an old broken table, patiently guiding her trembling hand over a torn notebook. When Trieu Khanh returns from work and sees them squeezed together with papers falling to the floor, he understands their silent struggle. Instead of ignoring it, he asks for old wooden planks, removes damaged nails, and rebuilds the tiny table into a wider shared study desk. The simple act brings dignity, hope, and warmth to the house. But just as Han finally writes her name with Tieu's help, Duong suddenly appears outside the gate, watching them in silence.